Hi, folks. I am the, go ahead and get us started. I am the head mead maker at Bos Meadery. The word that we use in the industry is actually mazer, and that's an old English word that means to intoxicate or to confuse. So I like to think of myself as the head confuser. People ask me all the time, why do I make mead? The simple answer is because I like to drink mead. That's my sister and I enjoying a bottle. I love craft beer, I love really good wine, I love whiskey, but I really love mead. But there's a bunch of reasons in my background why I'm into mead, and I'm going to talk about those today. One of them is that I have not one, but two master's degrees in medieval history. So if you got one pretty unuseful degree, it's always a good idea to get another one. But it did give me the chance to teach Beowulf about 9 times, and to think about what it was like to sit in that mead hall and drink that mead, waiting for Grendel. But I did get into the history of mead. If you don't know, mead is actually the world's oldest fermented beverage. It actually dates back to 6000 BC in China. Also early traces in Africa, all over Asia. Basically, mead was the predominant beverage until people figured out the civilizing force of growing crops and grew grain and grew grapes, and then wine and beer kind of overtook it. So people often ask me, what was ancient mead like? And I have one very simple answer for that. I'm pretty sure it sucked. They did not know anything about fermentation science, they didn't know anything about sanitation, and that gets to the next thing I'm really passionate about. As was mentioned, I went to the Siebel Institute. I was an avid home brewer for years. I got really into the science of brewing, making every type of beer that I possibly could until I decided to make mead. And my first batch of mead was a citrus honey mead infused with vanilla beans. And it was dry, and it was light, and the buzz was outstanding. And I just, from that moment on, was really intrigued by making meads. And I got really into the art of that, because there's actually so much that you can do with all the different varietals of honey, all the different spices and herbs and fruits that you can bring to bear. There's just an enormous amount that you can do with the canvas that is mead. But I settled into a niche of dry and sparkling meads, because when I went out to try to buy commercial mead, most of it was fairly sweet. And I really like dry wine, I really like dry mead, and so that's what I focused on. I focused on making dry and sparkling meads. And this brings me to another part of my background. Yes, this is me and my high school science Olympiad team. I have a love of science that goes way back. And I never went to prom, but I did win a gold medal in titration, which you can see there. Very proud of that, but I found myself in the right place. I ended up with a partner who is way into yeast nutrition. We actually call him the Yeast Lord because of his passion for yeast microbiology. And we put together our interests and our backgrounds in science and brewing and history and figured out some things about yeast. It's the most important part of the mead making process, in my opinion. And one of the reasons why I think mead has struggled in the modern era as a beverage is that yeast is actually really overwhelmed by the amount of sugar that it has to process in a mead fermentation. So we developed a process where we add the honey into the mead, the fermenting mead, very slowly, and that allows a quick, healthy fermentation as opposed to the traditional world of a fairly slow, sluggish, not very clean fermentation. We've also put a real emphasis on nutrition for the yeast. They don't naturally get the nitrogen that they need from honey, the way that they would from beer or wine. So we add a lot of nitrogen in along the way. We propagate our own yeast so we have a really healthy population. And that ultimately is how this medievalist ended up making the world's oldest fermented beverage in the most modern possible way. And also how I ended up about 6 months ago on this very stage reading skaldic poetry with a glass of very modern mead in my hand, horns on my head, actually for a group of metalheads. We put on a Mead and Metal Fest every year, and the moral of the story is if you bring all of your passions together, you can find yourself in the right place. And I hope that my passion will inspire you to go out and try some mead, because there will be mead.